Okay, I'm gonna probably get in trouble by Renee on this one because I don't have a collared shirt on and my microphone's not attached. But I'm gonna hold it just for the fun of it, and we'll see if we can get away with this. One of the things that I really wanted to accomplish with this podcast was to get people to read their Bible. We just covered the first 50 chapters of the Bible, the book of Genesis. I did, I don't know, 45 videos, however many it is. But there's so much more there than what I covered because these would be about an hour long if I covered every chapter in depth. And I don't really want to do that because I want you to do that. So, that being said, if you've finished our study, then that's great. We're going to start Exodus. So, today I'm going to kind of introduce the book and set it up, and then uh, our next video will be chapter one. So let's look at the book of Exodus. It's the second book of the Bible. It's pretty easy to find. You go 50 chapters and then boom, there it is. Um, it's the second book of the Torah. The first five books of the Bible are what we refer to as the Torah. So the Hebrew word for this book is Shmot. Shmot. It means names. It comes from the first words of the Bible. I mean, of the book. These are the names of the sons of Israel. That's generally how they named them. We came up with different names, but that's how they did it. Exodus is the beginning of a nation of people that have been elected and separated out away from all other people on the planet. Uh, the covenant given on Mount Sinai, called the Ten Commandments, consisted of more than just 10 basic laws. I tell people the Ten Commandments are kind of like the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. Everything fits within the Ten Commandments, but there are a lot more laws and stuff like that, more than just 10. This is also one of the most controversial books because there are things in here that some of us have been taught just the opposite most of our life. And you're going to find out you've been either lied to or just taught wrong. Part of it is because some teachers and pastors don't know what it says because they've never studied it. They just base their view on it on what they either learned in seminary, which was probably a Baptist seminary, or they just skip it altogether. So, but we're going to dig into it. It is going to offend some of your traditions because some of the things that we have always done that we thought were good, that we did for the right reasons, we thought were actually against what God wanted. God told us specifically not to do some things that we do on a pretty regular basis, and we're okay with that. We shouldn't be, but we are. We get a conditional covenant, a covenant that is based on man and God, each doing its part. Remember, the covenant made with Abraham all depended on God. It didn't require us to really do anything. It was all in His hands. Now, even though you've probably been about 24 hours since you finished Genesis, this book actually doesn't start for about 350 years before or since the end of Genesis. That's where we're starting. It's about 350 years into the future. I know. It's going to be fun. Some of the Israelites may remember that God told Abraham that Egypt was their destiny. But after 3.5 centuries, how many of them would trust that what God said, that He would get them out, was still true? I mean, how many of them even knew what those promises were? That's why we need to tell our kids what God says, because they need to know so when we're gone, they can live under those promises. So, the only authorized monument in Exodus is a tent structure that God says to build. That's the only authorized monument. That's going to be a big deal as we study. Also, Exodus is really key to understanding the Bible because there's so much in Exodus that God's trying to get out of us that we've learned in slavery and captivity. He used the book of Exodus to teach us how much of that we were blind to. I started this whole podcast with asking, I want people to ask why they believe what they believe. And if your answer is that's what he told me or what she told me or what I learned here or there, dig into the word. Find out if what they told you was even true. They may not have even known. So check those things. So God deals with the society or societal and religious structure of this new nation He's creating as we speak. They were being divided and separated and molded into the nation to be built in God's image and service to Him. That was the whole point. So we get instructions for building a structure and setting up a priesthood so that God would tabernacle. You probably heard the word tabernacle, but it means to dwell among His chosen people. We call this the wilderness tabernacle. The meaning of the tabernacle and its services are very relevant in Revelation. Everybody wants to know about Revelation, but nobody wants to do the pre-work. It's like, yeah, let's take a class on physics before we learn algebra or calculus. It's a pretty bad idea. The first couple of centuries in Egypt had been prosperous. They had lived a pretty good life. Many took up building trades, others became merchants, some were even cattle ranchers and farmers. Life was fairly good for the first couple of centuries. But a few decades before Joseph's arrival, Hyksos rulers were dominant over much of Egypt. We covered that, how they didn't have Egyptian rulers at the time. They had been taken over by Semites they were cousins of Israel. So they were not Egyptians, and the Egyptians detested these shepherd kings, as they called them. The Egyptian general gathered an army and defeated these rulers, and the Israelites would become the focus of the last 2 centuries of bitterness because they equated them as being the same. The Israelites would never have been there if these rulers hadn't allowed it and made it happen. So they blamed everybody associated with them. So the first job of the new king of Egypt was to gain control over the Israelites, and the solution was to make them forced laborers. You know, they did not build the pyramids. I think I've mentioned that a couple of times. That was all done way before they got there. And for the most part, at first, they weren't really slaves. They were just kind of the workforce. They were the ones that were doing all the work. It wasn't really like we picture of whips and chains and American slavery at first. Now it got there, but it was slow. And the reason I say that is because sometimes we think that would never happen to us. Well, it doesn't happen overnight. It's very, very subtle how we get off course. And that's pretty much what happened. They mainly made mud bricks and digging and did all the restoration of the waterways, the canals, and then building great cities to store up a lot of the food that they were saving for the famine. And thanks to Egyptian science, culture, and art, the skills of the Israelites, even though it was forced, Egypt became a world-class society because all these Israelites learned skills that, guess what, would be important when they got their own land. God was teaching them something here. So Egypt was the breadbasket of the world too. Because when the Nile would overflow and all the minerals and sediment would go, it would make the crops grow, both in Canaan and Egypt. So it was very important to the overall food of the world, the known world at the time. So there are waterways in Egypt still named after Joseph. They're still there today and in use. So at the time of the Israelites, it was a land of beauty and art and plenty. They had everything. When we hear them longing for their life back in Egypt, it's the food and shelter and being part of this magnificent culture. When you think about the people that live here now, especially the people that are 3rd, 4th generation Americans, their parents escaped something to get here. Those people don't feel the same as their grandparents or great grandparents because they know where they came from. The people that are here now think it's always been like this. That was the Israelites. They had no reason to want something different. They thought they were in a pretty good place until it became a slave situation where they couldn't get out of it. And that's how we all fall, is we think we can handle it. We can get as close to the edge. We don't have to pay attention until it's too late. And that is almost never true. we do have to pay attention. So it's going to take a really long time to get the slave mentality out of their heads. They've lived this way for 400 years, 200 years, but for a really long time. And then for God to tell them, hey, now you got to go out into the wilderness and conquer people. And they're like, hey, we don't do things like that. That slave mentality was we don't make decisions, we don't attack, we just follow orders. And so it's going to take a while to get all that slave mentality out of them. But guess what? God of the universe is going to do it. And it's going to be amazing. It's going to be a great story. And all I ask is if you hear me say something that you absolutely know goes against your pastor or your church, let me know. Talk to me about it. Don't just run off and hate on the Bible or hate on me. I might be wrong, but make sure you're going with what the Bible says, not what your pastor or your church or your Sunday school teacher said, because ultimately the word's the only one that matters. So that's the introduction to Exodus. We're going to get started tomorrow and just have a whole lot of fun going through Exodus. Take care. Don't forget, love God, love people, and change the world.